Today on TheBootGuy, we're talking about the classic Doc Marten 10-hole Basic Black. So back in the late 80s, I got my first pair of Doc Martens out of the back of a Thrasher magazine. There was two boots that they offered. One they called a monkey boot and one they called the 10-hole. And that's what I got. Sure, I was a kid and I was running around like all cool kids were in their black Doc Martens. What did I really know then about boots being comfortable or uncomfortable? But now in my adult life, when I received this pair of Doc Martens, I gotta say, I was really surprised to find them to be so uncomfortable. It might have something to do with the fact that I've tried on so many boots, I've owned so many boots, and I got this different idea of what comfort is today. But this boot fits more like a really cheap pair of boots. It just doesn't have that tight, good fit that I remember from a Doc Marten. So let's take a really close look at the materials first. So you've got this black leather. There's very few pieces of leather. When you count them out, there's almost really no separating chunks. It's made really well, or it's made to look really well. Now this boot hasn't changed much since the 1960s. Doc Marten used to make these boots for the policemen and the mailmen and just any working guy in the UK. And so it still has that same basic low-key look. The welt of the boot is still that iconic golden stitch, that wide golden stitch that goes all the way around the boot. And you know what? That still makes the boot look good. I mean, it still has that appeal to it that Doc Martens have always had. The clear sole, the grippy, clear, original Doc Marten sole used to be called the air sole. It seems that as kids, we used to talk about how your Doc Martens just never wear out. And judging by some of the materials that I see today, this doesn't look like the most durable sole there is. The fit on the Doc Marten boot, I feel it's big. And I don't mean that it's long or wide, it's just big. It doesn't feel like you can get the eyelids close enough to get the boot really tight. It never really feels secure, even when you have on thick wool socks or you've got something thick on your foot, whether it's wool or cotton. It just never seems that this boot can tighten down and you can get a really nice tight fit. Which is something that I always remembered about Doc Martens. I always remembered you being able to get them really nice and tight and laced up really nice. This pair just doesn't seem to do that. Now the leather that they use, well, it doesn't feel like the best leather in the world. And I've read in certain places that guys say that since they switched production from this country to that country, that this boot in particular, the 10-hole basic black boot, the quality has really dropped. Now I haven't touched a pair of these in 15 years, and I really can't speak to how they were within that span. If 15 years ago they were a nicer boot and today they're this. Now there's not much going on inside this boot. It's just a hard footbed that's attached to the sole. The insole they send along, well, it looks more like a wafer than anything. It's a single density, it's very thin, it's got a little leatherette type vinyl piece on the heel. But there's not much to it. This isn't anything that you're going to ever write home about being super comfortable. They still do include the stamp on the bottom of the sole. And I guess they kind of have to, because that's kind of like an icon that goes along with the Doc Marten, where it says oil, fat, acid, petro, and alkaline resistant. And so I guess this type of gummy type sole is resistant to all those materials. But it just doesn't feel like it's any good. It just feels very thin, like there's nothing between you and it. Now something else that I always remembered about Doc Martens as a kid is they always had the best, strongest shoelaces. The laces that come on this are like kids' laces, something you'll find on like a child's snow boot. It's very stretchy. The airwear pull-on tab is still back there. That hasn't changed or went away. Now the overall construction of this boot is still the same. It still looks like a Doc Marten. That gives it more of a fashion appeal rather than a work appeal. I mean, if you were going to buy this as a work shoe, you'd have to be doing some really light work. Maybe some office work where from time to time you had to go into the field and you just needed a pair of boots. Well, the Doc Marten could really fit that bill. Now, if you were looking for something to spend a 12-hour day walking around a place in, you might want to look somewhere else. So that's the classic Doc Marten 10-hole, number 1490, soft toe. Hey, if you've ever worn this Doc Marten, or if you've been wearing this newer generation of Doc Martens, please comment below. Tell me where I'm wrong. Tell me where these boots are still the same strong, superior boots that they were back in the 80s, back in the 70s, back when they really used that great sole material and that great leather. Please comment below. Hey, if you're interested in knowing more about Doc Martens, if you want to see a little history of the company, if you want to see some of the other models that they make, or just extremely up close detailed photos of this boot, plus the insole, the laces, and the eyelets, swing by TheBootGuy.com. There I'll have a really nice breakdown on this boot. Hey, please don't forget to hit my subscribe button below. It really helps out. And if you should have any questions about Doc Marten boots or work boots in general, feel free to email me. I'm always around and I try to respond as quick as possible. All right, until the next time, I'm The Boot Guy. Thanks a lot for watching.